Pravit Moy Druzy. Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. I'm a professor who is trying to help you understand what's going on in Ukraine and give you some context about the war. So, in the last few days, I was watching the news with some interest as you'll see these articles about how Poland is suspending imports of grain from Ukraine. And wait a minute, Poland, they're supposed to be like real tight and right there with them. Well, there's a reason for that. Glut of cheap Ukrainian grain sparks farmers' protests. Farmers in Romania, Bulgaria protest Ukrainian grain influx. What's going on? Okay, so trying to counter what Russia was doing to Ukraine, the EU was allowing the Ukrainian grain to come in dirt cheap, to come in tax free or some equivalent of that. Now, this was a good idea that was intended to counter the difficulties that the Ukrainians were facing because of Russia. But when they brought in this grain, underpricing the Polish or Romanian or Bulgarian farmers, it created a real problem with their neighbors who were trying to support them. So the point here is that you have to look at the law of unintended consequences. You mean to do X, but in doing X, you actually create Y as a condition. It's something different than what you were expecting it to be. They just thought that they were going to sell their grain too, but what they were really doing was underpricing and hurting the farmers in the countries that were trying to help them. Now, we do this kind of thing um, with both this scenario and with the war in general all the time. With this scenario, I would talk about something in class about like the poverty cure. Okay, poverty cure, if you just Google poverty cure, it'll help you understand like how when we do well-intentioned things like try to give food or resources or machines or whatever to someone in a poor country, rather than help build their entrepreneurial base so that they can be self-sufficient, it can actually do more harm than good. You can look up povertycure.org, or you can go to YouTube and see poverty cure on YouTube and see the videos there, and it'll help you understand what's going on. Now, more importantly, in the war in Ukraine, we have this same kind of thing backfiring in other ways. So, for example, the US dollar is going to be under attack to some degree because we're using economic sanctions as a weapon of war. And so, the Russians, particularly, are very motivated to move away from US dollar denominated supplies of things and try to convince others in the world to move off the US dollar to some other currency. And they're even fine if it was the yuan or some other currency that is not even the Russian ruble. So that could backfire and have an unintended consequence. Of course, the greatest unintended consequence is what Russia did. Russia meant to come in and in 3 days or 3 weeks or whatever it is to have taken over this large mass of the landmass of Ukraine, and it didn't really work out. Look at the backfiring. NATO is about Finland and joining NATO. That's about half the size of Ukraine, coming in as a border on Russia. Huge backfire. The lives lost, the treasure spent, the banking system is in terrible straits in Russia now, and that's because of unintended consequences. They never saw this coming. So when you're planning something, you have to think not like checkers, but more like chess. What are the second, third, fourth order consequences of whatever the decisions that you make? And this is kind of restricted by bounded rationality, where you can only think about the things that you understand. This is why it's important to have a multitude of counselors when you make decisions. Of course, that's not what Putin did when he decided to invade. He kept his counselors of who was going to make the decisions about invading Ukraine really close. It was a handful, a small handful. Maybe you can count the advisors that he talked to on a hand or two. So that was a bad move, and this caused unintended consequences. Okay, so I hope that helps you understand how unintended consequences works. And if you have a question about anything that we talked about here, please leave it in the comments below. If this was helpful to your thinking, you're now going to see unintended consequences everywhere. Now that you're familiar with the concept, you're going to start seeing like, oh, well, when they did this, this is what's likely to happen. Right. That's exactly how you're supposed to work. You're building dendrites. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.